Hi everybody. Good morning, and so good to be here talking about something that I think matters so much and affects so many of us in so many ways, including our friends, our family, as well as the patients and clients that we work for. I love my role as a sleep psychiatrist because there really is a tremendous interplay between how you feel during the day and how you sleep during the night, and that's something that we're going to get into over this presentation. So without further ado, let's get started. Um, let's see. So, yeah, I'm really grateful to stand on the shoulders of giants. My training was at Stanford University in the sleep medicine department, and I really got the chance to work with some greats in the field. William Dement, Christian Guillemino. These are many people that are basically credited with discovering a lot of very fundamental aspects of sleep medicine and developing the field. Bill Dement is the guy that went to Congress and said, sleepiness is red alert. We really need to take care of people that are underslept and make sure that they don't get into car accidents and things like that. And he really had a big impact on public health, and we'll get into that as well. Christian Guillemino did pioneering work in sleep apnea. And these are some of the people I got to train with. They're both not around anymore. And it really, for me, was a tremendous privilege to train under people of their stature. So sleep is interesting. It's been around forever, and all organisms sleep. Even the most simple organisms like a hydra are shown to have periods of rest, even before they developed any brains. So it's not even as if you need to have a brain to sleep. It appears that all metabolic organisms, if they're doing anything with energy, need some periods of resting and relaxing, and also some periods of expending the energy. So even animals, creatures without a brain, require sleep during the night as well. This graph is really interesting. There's a neuroscientist, Paul Shaw, who said, that even the earliest life forms have been known to sleep. And he actually believes that, it's not that we didn't evolve to sleep, we evolved wakefulness, which is that many of these creatures might have actually been in a state of basic sleep, and only eventually did they develop periods of increased activity, such as wakefulness. And this chart is really interesting because you see that like a lot of creatures sleep, but then you also realize that a lot of creatures can be affected by sleep drugs, and a lot of animals will follow circadian patterns in their sleep. Um, and anyway, yeah, and here wakes up rapidly from sleep. You can see that even things like hydras down to reptiles and birds, all animals really have a pattern of sleep during the day and the night. So why is sleep important for humans? There's so much data that, lack of sleep builds up into, it can definitely exacerbate the risk of depression. It can cause insomnia, actually, ironically. What happens when people don't get good sleep is sometimes they actually get nervous about sleeping, and that in turn can precipitate even more insomnia. There's some increased risk of cancer in people that don't get sufficient sleep. ADHD is such a big one. I think any normal, any neurotypical human who doesn't get enough sleep can actually develop symptoms that really resemble ADHD. Trouble with attention, focus, memory, recall is things that we all have experienced, I think, when we haven't slept enough. Then there's like metabolic conditions like diabetes. There's, mood disorders besides depression. Lack of sleep can really potentiate conditions such as bipolar mania, or anxiety for sure. And then again, more metabolic things, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, as well as chronic fatigue, which can all really wear down our health as well as our quality of life. On the topic of quality of life, this was an awesome study that was conducted in 95, but they really looked at, what is the difference between people who have no sleep difficulties, occasional sleep difficulties, and then frequent sleep difficulties with respect to these various life tasks, ranging from, coping with things, accomplishing tasks, general mood, relationships, as well as family and social life. And what's really amazing here is like if you look at this graph, like, frequent sleep difficulties, really you could see increase the percentage risk of a lot of life difficulties in these particular areas. And the differences are not small. So please just take a look at this graph and realize like just how much sleep matters. Um, Looking more specifically into psychiatry, you notice also that people with insomnia are at far greater risk of all the conditions below, including depression, anxiety, alcohol use, substance use as well. But I'm really blown away by just like the coincidence that I see even in my practice of people with insomnia, and conditions such as anxiety, depression, really being much, much worse when people can't sleep. And part of the role that I have in my job as a sleep doctor, I really think we get a lot of people better by just getting them sleeping at night. So important. And it really is just like one half of the equation. In many ways, I look at sleep and wake as kind of like a yin and yang. And whatever you can do to improve wake during the day can actually improve sleep during the night. And when you improve sleep during the night, you can markedly improve performance and how people feel during the day. One other thing that's not on this graph that's worth noting is that, the risk of suicide is really much higher in people that don't sleep. And that's something to really be aware of in your suicidal patients. Insomnia is a major predictor of risk for suicide in people that are on risk for that. So sleep deprivation historically also has caused a lot of disasters. Chernobyl was one of them. It happened at like 4 a.m. when people are sleep deprived and not exactly at their best. Shift workers are known to suffer from a lot of conditions, specifically including metabolic disorders, and greater instances of depression and anxiety, possibly even a higher cancer risk because their sleep is completely dysregulated. And Chernobyl is an example of that. The Exxon Valdez disaster also happened, I believe, at like 3 in the morning. There's been MTA train crashes that happen at night. Actually, that train crash was the result of an operator who had sleep apnea and wasn't treated. So that people falling asleep while having important roles is very dangerous. And the last slide is really one about family relationships. And I can't stress enough, besides, global disasters resulting from sleep deprivation makes people a little cranky, irritable, impatient, and impulsive. And we'll look at all that later. But the number of like family stressors that result from people not sleeping adequately is pretty significant. So a lot of Americans are actually, driving on fumes, and this is really the risk. They've shown that, like, if you've gotten less than 4 hours of sleep, your odds of being in a car accident are about 15 times higher. And 4 hours is kind of the magic number. 7 hours is already considered okay, but when you get down to 6 hours, you're already showing here some increased risk of getting into a car accident, which really becomes much disproportionately higher when you get down to less than 4 hours. It's also worth noting that being sleep deprived and driving, or doing anything important for that matter, is almost as bad as it is as bad as being drunk. And here they showed that less than 4 hours of sleep does really, people with that amount of sleep really behave as if they're 1.5 times the legal limit on alcohol consumption. The scary thing about sleepy drivers is that, so, drunk drivers are shown to have a slowed reaction time. Sleepy drivers, on the other hand, have no reaction time. And there's been numerous really scary instances where drivers just fell asleep at the wheel and just plowed right into cars. Um, and this is a very scary thing because they're coming in at full speed. There's no reaction, and they're just coming in fast. And on the right, you see that button. This is Will Dement's work, uh, and his whole campaign was drowsiness is red alert. If you're sleepy, you really should pull over. And you definitely should counsel your patients that if anybody is taking any hypnotic medications for sleep, or they have any issues such as sleep apnea that's not treated. I've had patients that are so sleepy that they fall asleep in my waiting room. But the big message from Bill Dement was if you're drowsy, it's red alert. Do not continue driving. Like, take a break, pull over, get some air, and beyond that, try to correct what's going on at night. Like, why aren't you getting good sleep or enough sleep? Another wild instance here. This was an Ethiopian Airlines flight. The pilots fell asleep while flying the plane, and they overshot the airport by about an hour, I think, triggering some alarm that woke them up, and they came back. But again, this is proof that like sleepy people are just going head on. There's no stopping, and that's where it gets scary. Another interesting finding, they found that kids in school, optimizing sleep can make a tremendous impact on their school and academic performance. And this is something that for a long time was debated. They often said, oh, kids are lazy, they want to sleep in. But the actual natural biological trend for teenagers is to become night owls. It's a circadian thing. It's a shift that occurs with puberty. And it's not that they're lazy, it's just that their natural circadian rhythm shifts later. The problem is that, junior high and high school starts becoming earlier and earlier. And now you're kind of forcing kids to be awake when they'd rather be sleeping. The result of that is a profound impact on academics, actually. And they've shown here that, sleep can impact as much as 25% of the effect we see in how people perform academically. So again, another tremendous reason to make sure More important perhaps even than adults is that kids get enough sleep because it's important for brain development, academics, emotional control, and so on. The other really big thing with sleep that's so interesting because it impacts so much of what we do is impulse control. There's two things that really I think set humans aside from like other animals, and those are number one, abstraction, the ability to imagine things and things that aren't here, like a monkey that won't understand the difference, for example, between $100 bill and a banana, but to a human that has a lot of meaning. So abstraction is one thing. The other big thing is impulse control, which is being able to stop yourself, to not say or do that thing that you want to do, to know right from wrong and to be able to hold the line. And what really happens in people that are sleep deprived is we see tremendous dips in their ability for impulse control, which is quite mind blowing. What that amounts to is, in the book by Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep, he talks about, people that are sleep deprived are more likely to cheat, lie, and break some rule. Certainly, but even subtler than that, people that are sleep deprived have diminished ability to put brakes on their feelings. And the internal experience of insomnia or insufficient sleep is really profound because people get feelings and they can't stop them. So that thought about what your boss said or what your neighbor said ruminates on and on and on because you don't have the impulse control to stop it. And what I see in my patients with anxiety and depression is that everything gets amplified when they're not sleeping well because they lost the ability to put the brakes on that. So impulse control is a really big thing that when people aren't sleeping sufficiently, that's something that's missing and the days become much harder when you can't stop yourself from reacting to everything. So what is sleep? We'll talk about two main processes that are important in sleep. And it's kind of simple. The graph may be more complicated than it needs to be, but you have a circadian process. The circadian process means around the day, circadia. And circadian means, like there's natural shifts in melatonin that you get sleepy towards the evening, and then melatonin decreases during the night, and then you're awake during the day. Then there's another process called process S. Both of these we're going to get into a little more detail. Process S is like the process. It's almost like a tiredness hormone or neurotransmitter that builds up during the day and recharges during the night. We'll look at both of these processes because it's kind of interesting. So process C, as we were saying, is the circadian cycle. What you see here, sunlight affects our circadian rhythms by means of the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which in turn gets the pineal gland to produce melatonin. Melatonin starts to peak about 2, 3 hours before your natural bedtime. And the levels, once they reach a certain level, you become sleepy. But what's important to note there is that, you need darkness for that melatonin to start building up. And here again, you see like the natural trend of melatonin during the day. You could see that it starts to peak, starts to escalate around 8 p.m. and around sometime around midnight it peaks. The other thing to notice on the right is that as we get older, our levels of melatonin start to diminish. And there is a lot of evidence that older people don't sleep as well or don't sleep as long. And that is a result of a natural drop in the level of melatonin. Anecdotally, I can tell you that a number of my older patients do well on melatonin supplementation, but the dose has to be right and it has to be administered in the right way. But indeed, melatonin is really important for that circadian process that tells us when to sleep. The biggest problem in modern life with melatonin has been the advent of artificial light. We are exposed to more bright light than ever before, and it ranges from your big screen TV to your Kindle to your iPad to your phone. And I cannot say enough how many patients I've seen that have suffered from insomnia just because there's just too much light in their house. California also recently, is advocating for these LED lights that are high efficiency, which are wonderful, but some of them can be quite blue. And blue light in particular is especially bad for melatonin secretion. Blue light is also what comes off your iPhone as well as your television. So as much as you can, every light in your house after 8 p.m. should be dimmed a little bit. The colors that you need to go for at night are really just like sunset colors or the colors of a candle or fire. Um, and that just yeah, it plays a tremendous role in causing people insomnia. As much as you can, dim screens, you know what I mean? Invert colors. And I always tell my patients, like, do a test with your phone, like to see if it's too bright. Like if you aim it away from your face at the wall and it can act like a flashlight, it's too bright. So try to keep everything as dim as possible. The other cool thing is like they've shown that a lot of insomnia can be fixed by going camping. I don't know personally. I mean, sleeping in a tent isn't always easy, but you can't help but notice that like when you go camping by like, 9, 10 p.m., you had dinner at 7, you're done. There's nothing to do. It's dark, it's cold, and so easily you can get sleepy. So process S is another piece of the circadian cycle in a way, or the sleep cycle. Process S is different though. It's not related to sunlight. It's really related to like your brain's activity. And the more active your brain is at night, it produces adenosine. And adenosine just builds up and builds up during the day rather. And as it builds up, you eventually become fatigued. And that's why you're tired towards the evening, besides the melatonin. Coffee is fascinating because it works by blocking the effects of adenosine. So coffee in many ways just like masks your sleepiness. And I want to point out though that a cup of Starbucks coffee has 410 milligrams of caffeine, which is quite a bit. We'll talk about what that can do right here. It's also worth noting that coffee has a 6-hour half-life. What that means is that every 6 hours, your body processes about half of the coffee that you drank. So this is where it gets scary because if you do the math, what happens if you drink a venti at noon, right? So a venti, 12 ounces of coffee, sorry, 20 ounces of coffee at noon, 6 hours later becomes 10 ounces of coffee. And 6 hours later than that becomes 5 ounces of coffee. But that's now 12 hours later. So that's 12 a.m. So for a lot of people, would you ever consider drinking 5 ounces of Starbucks at midnight? The answer is probably no. But if you're drinking coffee late in the day, that's the problem with the half-life of coffee. It kind of lingers in your system longer than you'd expect it to. And that in turn can diminish sleep quality as well as sleep efficiency. So let's talk about the structure of sleep because this is pretty awesome too. Very roughly speaking, like sleep comes in like 90-second cycles during the 90-minute cycles during the night. Um, the easiest way to think about sleep is that really there's like two types of sleep. There's slow wave sleep that happens in the beginning of the night, and then there's REM sleep that happens towards the morning. Slow wave sleep is the sleep where you are completely out, your breathing is regular. You can really tell when someone's in slow wave sleep. It's when the tooth fairy comes at night for the kids because they absolutely will not wake up then. Um, and people are in deep sleep. It's those times if the alarm rings and you have a flight at like 3 or 4 a.m., it takes you almost a few seconds to understand the time on the clock because you're in a daze. So that's slow wave sleep. That happens in the beginning of the night. Towards the second half of the night, towards the morning, you start getting REM sleep. And REM sleep is dream sleep. And the really cool thing about REM sleep is now it's almost as if you're kind of awake, but you're asleep. Your eyes are moving rapidly, and that's the rapid eye movement. Your breathing is irregular. Your heart rate is also variable. And that also is, we'll get into that later, but that's the dream sleep that we see more towards the morning. So for all intents and purposes, let's just remember the beginning of the night is slow wave sleep. The end of the night is REM sleep. So we're going to talk about each of these a little bit now. So deep sleep, slow wave sleep, the one that comes in the beginning of the night, is really important for the storage of memory. It also gives the brain a chance to clean up metabolic byproducts, waste products from the day. And it also is a period of metabolic rest. As you can imagine, as it sounds, deep sleep really is deep. And you get a chance to kind of just unwind, slow down, and your body gets a chance to really rest because all systems are kind of going minimally at that point. This was a really amazing study where they found that, so in Alzheimer's, there's these two things that build up, which is, beta amyloid and tau proteins and neurofibrillary tangles. They've shown that people that are sleep deprived, even one night, start to build up these same toxins or metabolic byproducts that we see in Alzheimer's, which is mind blowing. This means that like even one night of sleep, you start building up the same stuff that we see in people with Alzheimer's. And you definitely know what the end effect of people with Alzheimer's is, the loss of memory and the disorientation. And you indeed can really see that people, even after a night of sleep deprivation, are a little bit, their memory is worse, their impulse control is worse, and they don't, their impulse control is going to be worse as well. So what's fascinating here is that like sleep deprivation can actually like resemble Alzheimer's. But on the flip side of that, I also want to point out that I've treated many patients with dementia and mild cognitive impairment, and getting them sleeping better is miraculous. They do much better when they get sleep. Their memory improves, their recall, their orientation gets better. I'm not saying that it's a cure, but it makes a tremendous difference. And conversely, people that have any kind of cognitive impairment, whether it's traumatic brain injury or dementia, if they're not sleeping well, things are much, much worse. And this is the reason why. And The lymphatic system actually is the part of the brain. It's kind of like the lymph system, which cleans up toxins from the body, but the lymphatic system works in the brain. And literally the brain like shrinks a little bit during deep sleep, and it gets this like power wash that really cleans up all those beta amyloid tau toxins and all the stuff from a whole day of metabolic activity. And that all happens in deep sleep. And that happens by this lymphatic system. If you're not getting deep sleep, this system doesn't work and the toxins remain. And one of the main things actually that impairs deep sleep is substances, eating too late, but also specifically alcohol, can really impact deep sleep and result in a lack of it. We'll talk a little bit about REM sleep now too, which is the one towards the morning. REM is important for procedural memory. We'll talk about that. Emotional processing. It is in some ways the ultimate VR simulation. And lastly, there's also proof that REM sleep is tremendously powerful for creativity, and it might even resemble the mechanism by which psychedelics work in the brain. What was really cool in this study, they followed rats going through a maze and they recorded their brains while they were doing this. Later on in REM sleep, it was amazing. They literally saw the rat like replaying the same parts of the brain lit up in the right sequence as if the rat was exploring the maze. So that was really awesome. They showed that literally during REM sleep, your brain is just like instant replay going through whatever you did that day. And in this case, the rat was dreaming of the mazes. And important to note also that not only did it rehearse the maze during the night, but its performance on the maze actually improved. So it's like practicing in your sleep, and that's what happens during REM, which is pretty awesome. REM also really boosts creativity. Part of that, I think, is like, the brain in REM sleep is kind of trying to connect random parts and random experiences a little bit. The brain's kind of having fun. And what that results in, I think, is sometimes you have like really bizarre dreams, and that's why dreams are strange and odd sometimes. But also, there's been many people, among them even Thomas Edison, that really relied on REM sleep to get new ideas and insights, because the brain, again, is kind of like rehearsing the problems of the day and testing out new possibilities. So here's just a quick smattering of like, the role of REM, the research on REM and creativity. And you could see that, it improves creativity, boosts creative powers, creative problem solving. Like it's amazing. Your brain while you're sleeping can actually do a lot. It just needs to be allowed the chance to do so. So let's talk about how to sleep now that we know sleep is so important. Um, the first thing that sleep loves is really like rhythm and regularity. Sleep is a circadian thing and it likes to happen at the same time, at the same place, at the same setting. And just some kind of regularity is so important, and especially with like your wake time and the time you go to bed at night. Tell everybody to wake up at the same time. Everyone loves to sleep in on the weekends, but it's actually not great for you. The more you can diminish that variance between your weekend and your weekday, the better. Really important also in the mornings to get sunlight, um, bright light in the morning, get outside. If you live in a dark place, some people use light boxes, especially people with depression, that can help. But if you live anywhere else, like if you could possibly get out and do a walk for 20 minutes, get bright light or sit by a window, that actually helps you fall asleep better at night because it starts the timer in your brain going, that circadian process that says that, hey, the day started. The other important thing I tell my patients, get vertical. Like the more vertical you are during the day, the better you'll be at being horizontal during the night. And that means movement, activity, um, daylight, of course, helps as well as you're doing all that. But truly, I mean, the opposite of that would be like laying on your couch all day. And indeed, behavior like that doesn't really result in great sleep at night. We talk about, noontime, no more caffeine past noon, naps, if you're going to take them, they shouldn't be longer than 30 minutes. And don't really take a nap past siesta time. So no later than 2, 3 p.m. In the evening, we tell patients, no exercise before bed. Ideally, no alcohol, no big meals around bedtime. A typical saying that I say repeatedly is let's turn tech off at 10. Um, if you can, like turn screens down, you know what I mean? Like ideally an hour or two before bedtime. And even beyond that, I tell, a lot of my patients to do try to slow down a little bit. You can't be doing really busy, active things and expect to fall asleep, 20 minutes later. So it's important to kind of slow things down and just relax and just start kind of easing yourself to bed. And lastly, I want to point out that there's a time to get on the sleep train. And there's actually been some studies that show that if you get to bed too late, you're not going to go through the same sleep cycles as if you went to bed earlier. Again, because your brain loves rhythm and regularity. It's almost like if you miss the train, to get to bed on time, you will miss certain stages of sleep. Your deep sleep may not be the same, but you also may the period of sleepiness may pass. And many of us have known that, where like you stay up late enough, eventually you're not sleepy anymore. And that's completely the opposite of what you want to be doing, and the next day is not going to be a good one. So, what to do if you can't sleep? So, again, we do a lot of counseling on cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And, it's really important to remember that it's kind of like Pavlovian conditioning. And you need to really associate the bed with what you want to do in bed. And those two things really should be sleep and sex. Um, that's important because we tell people if you're in bed and you're tossing and turning and you're not falling asleep, you don't want to lay there frustrated and annoyed and huffing and puffing and staring at the alarm clock and hoping not to wake up your partner. The real answer is like, hey, you try to sleep for you try to fall asleep for 20 minutes. And if that doesn't work, then you get out of bed and you do something pretty like chill. And I'm talking like, you read a book in a dimly lit setting and you're not reading something fascinating. We're also telling people definitely don't wake up and start answering emails, getting food, or doing anything that really, coming back to Pavlovian conditioning, you don't want to do anything that rewards not sleeping, right? So if you're not sleeping, we really say, okay, you should kind of sit with a book, nothing terribly exciting. And when you're sleepy, then you get back into bed. Now, for those 20 minutes that you're trying to fall asleep before you call it quits, we tell people, well, meditation helps a lot. If you can focus inwardly, try to clear your thoughts, breathe, some square breathing is good. That helps a lot. And I tell my patients, like, if you really want to treat insomnia by night, it really helps if you can practice meditation during the day. Um, we tell people also, don't count sheep. It's better to visualize. There's some really cool studies that showed if you invoke your visual system in the form of visualizing things like, visualizing the sheep instead of counting them, or visualizing any kind of scene or your favorite place, that actually gets people to sleep faster, which I thought was really fascinating because the theory there was that dreaming and sleep is kind of like a visual process. So by priming yourself for sleep by visualizing things, you're kind of triggering that like sleep process, which is visual. Um, that really helps. And again, the last point here also talks about no rewards for not sleeping. As we said, nothing exciting if you're not able to sleep. No ice cream, no emails, no taking out the dishwasher or whatever. Just a quiet book in a quiet setting. It helps to also remember that we are still cave people. Um, and it's really important to remember that because I think, humans really sleep better in a particular setting that kind of resembles a cave, actually. And what we've seen is that cool temperatures by night really help people fall into deeper sleep. And that's actually why we have some patients, we tell people to, like, keep their bedroom cold at night. You want your body temperature to dip because the more it dips, the more deep sleep you get into. Some people will actually take a hot bath or a hot shower before bed, or use a hot tub, and that also makes sleep deeper because then your body basically warmed up and now is going to cool off more. So anything you can do to increase that cooling during the night really helps you enter deep sleep. And lastly, and obviously, I mean, you definitely want to sleep in a cool, in a dark, quiet place. So it's important to be mindful of the light in your room as well, and as well as the bedding, and make sure things are breathable and you feel generally cool. So, what are some common things that disrupt sleep? So stress and lack of downtime is one of these that I see all so often. It almost feels like some people get so wound up during the day that they almost like it takes them they don't have enough downtime in the night to cool off. So they're like it's kind of like you ran really hard on a treadmill, 500 miles an hour, and in the 6 hours that after work before sleep, you haven't slowed down yet. So a lot of people really just work too much or stress too much. We see this so often. And that's really a common thing, a theme that I see in my work as well, whether it's anxiety, stress, or just like unreasonable work schedules and demands. People sometimes just don't have enough downtime to slow down. Other disruptors are, alcohol, caffeine, late meals, really not good for you. Your body has to work to process a meal. And if you ate too much right before bed, your body's going to be less resting during the night because it has to process that food. Another thing I see so often that nobody really understands, like a lot of people aren't aware that they have it, is restless leg syndrome. Be sure to ask your patients and your clients about this because RLS is basically it's an uncomfortable sensation in the feet, an itching or burning sensation that gets worse in the night, is present in both legs, and gets better with movement. RLS keeps people awake because their partner will be like, you're constantly moving or kicking or something, and it can actually make falling asleep pretty hard. It's also important because certain psych medications, um, medications like the dopamine blockers or the SSRIs, can actually cause RLS to come to happen or possibly to get worse. So it's important to kind of talk to your patients. If someone can't sleep, just check in that they don't have RLS because that's something we see quite commonly. And lastly, the last big one is sleep apnea. And as you guys know, sleep apnea is like a blockage of the airway that results in people not being able to breathe during the night. And no one really dies from sleep apnea, but in the long term, it's really not good for you. Um, it does result in frequent wakings during the night, which results in fragmented sleep. Um, Fragmented sleep means you don't get to go into those deep stages of the REM stage consistently. You're always waking up, and that results in like you just didn't get that quality sleep. What we often do with our patients is we use an app sometimes that records audio all night. SnoreLab is a good one. It'll just let you record audio and hear what you sounded like throughout the night. That way you don't have to rely on your bed partner. And for many of my patients, actually, an app like that is really good at motivating people to treat their sleep apnea because they actually hear how terrible they sound during the night or how much they're struggling to breathe. So definitely a nice quick check to do at home. One of these apps if you suspect someone has sleep apnea. Again, I should just disclaimer is that it doesn't replace a proper sleep study by all means, but it is a quick and easy way to tell at home what you sound like at night. The common treatment for sleep apnea is CPAP. And this mask in particular, this is the P10 by ResMed, is one that I show patients all the time. People have a lot of misconceptions around CPAP. They think it's a big, ugly mask, and listen, sometimes it can be a bigger mask, but in most cases, a smaller mask like this can work. The machine is really quiet. It doesn't make much noise. And people just like get, I don't know, when people start sleeping better, they really appreciate the value of CPAP. And that in fairness, that's not the case with everyone. Some people do struggle with the mask, but I really believe that with the right settings and the right combination of masks and CPAP pressures, and some people need a little bit of medication to help them sleep. I've gotten a lot of people to sleep with CPAP, and it's helped them tremendously in their life quality as well as their sleep quality. If we're going to look at insomnia, it's cool to realize that there's about like three different types of insomnia. And it makes sense. It's basically trouble falling asleep, trouble staying asleep, or trouble sleeping through the morning. And we call those initiation insomnia, maintenance insomnia, or terminal insomnia. These are good to know because the causes and treatments are sometimes different for these. Initiation insomnia really is caused by anxiety. Like trouble falling asleep is because you're stressing out. RLS causes a little bit of that. Caffeine can cause some of that too. Stimulants, of course, also there's people that take Adderall and Concerta or Ritalin derivatives, and those medications also can cause people to have trouble falling asleep. Then there's problems staying asleep, and this is also caused by anxiety. It can be caused by needing to go to the bathroom, bed partners that are loud, um, but also sleep apnea. Also, a major cause of trouble staying asleep during the night. Lastly, there's terminal insomnia, which is people that wake up too early. People with depression have this, and that's always an important marker and worth looking at. Anxiety can cause that, um, as well as sleep apnea as well, can cause people to have trouble sleeping through the morning. The typical treatments for insomnia are really CBT, which is some of the stuff that we talked about. It works really well. It works almost as well as medication, or perhaps better than medication. And that really consists of sleep hygiene, which is the regularity, the cooling the bedroom. The bed is only for sleep and sex. Other methods that we use sometimes are called sleep restriction. Sleep restriction we use in people who have a low sleep efficiency. We calculate a sleep efficiency by how much time you were asleep divided by how much time you were in bed. And if someone's sleep efficiency is less than 80%, sometimes we'll tell them to go to bed later and wake up at the same time. You kind of like squeeze the window of sleep so that people can get denser sleep during that time. We also talk about managing awakenings, like what to do when you wake up. We talked about that. And the last thing I want to point out is also like relax and repeat. Ironically, one of the most challenging things about insomnia is that fear of not sleeping creates more insomnia. And the more people worry, oh my God, I didn't sleep, it's going to be terrible, the worse they'll sleep. So paradoxically, we really tell patients to relax and remind them that they're going to be okay. And the point is to really just relax into sleep to allow it to happen, not to force it. As in the case of a Chinese finger trap, the more you force sleep, the worse it is actually. So we tell people to cool off and just, hey, sleep will come, but you gotta create the environment in which it will. In a lot of my patients, I also see this this example of like battlefield sleep, where people are just running on empty. And battlefield sleep is something we see in patients with anxiety or even some forms of mania. Battlefield sleep is the kind of sleep you'd get, if you were in a war situation, where I feel like, people have trouble falling asleep when they're vigilant. They have trouble staying asleep. They wake up easily. They're easily startled. And they get like the bare minimum amount of sleep that they need to survive, which is probably about 4 or 5 hours. And then they wake up. So they're getting by. They're not going to die, but it's definitely not good long term for health outcomes, metabolic or psychological, psychiatric. But there are people that are so stressed that are kind of getting by on this minimum amount of sleep, and it's dangerous long term, and certainly has psychological impacts evident even the next day. So how much sleep do we need? Um, School age children need a lot. They need about like 10 hours. Teenagers need about 9 to 10 hours. And ironically, only like 31% of them are getting enough of sleep these days. Adults get by on about 7 to 8 hours of sleep, but it's also shocking that like 30% of adults get less than 6 hours. And six is okay. It's not great, but four is really where, your risk of a car accident is much, much higher. So I don't know, 7, 8 hours is ideal for adults, but and it's concerning to see how few adults get that. Some good news came out a few years ago. They did this large study in the United Kingdom and China, and they followed health outcomes of people depending on how much they slept. Um, and 7 hours turned out to be the ideal sweet spot for sleep, which I thought was actually a relief for a lot of patients, because a lot of our patients are, bent on getting 8, 9 hours and stressing out if they get less. The reality is that 7 is really associated with the optimal health outcomes. Even people that slept longer than that did less well than people that slept 7, and sleeping less than 7 also wasn't good for your health. This is cool because, to come back to that, the finger trap, you don't want to force sleep. And sometimes if you're trying to sleep 9 hours and you really only need 7, you're going to get insomnia, and that's going to stress you out, and that's going to make you sleep worse. And the real answer is you could get by with 7. So 7 is a good number to aim for, but I think it's also important to realize that a lot of us, when we aim for 8 hours of sleep, we end up getting 7 or 6. And when you aim for 7, you shouldn't get 6 or 5. So make sure you still give yourself a window of sleep of like 8 hours, maybe even 9, in which you're quiet, you're in bed, you're reading a book, and you're open to falling asleep. You're creating that window to get on the sleep train. Lastly, I want to point out our website. If you have any ideas or questions, please take a look. I'm writing on this topic all the time because sleep is so important. Even recently, there was this amazing study on aromatherapy that showed that older people, middle-aged people that were exposed to different scents during the night showed like marked boosts in cognition of 226%. And I'm thinking to myself, where do I get a diffuser for my bedroom? But anyway, there's a lot of cool stuff, and I can't say enough how fascinated I am with this field. And please just check out the website, read what I write, because I definitely have a lot to say on this matter. And this is something that's both a personal and professional obsession for me that I deeply enjoy and love working with patients on. So that's about it for today. It's been a pleasure chatting about this, and I'd love to hear any questions or thoughts, or even your own experiences about sleep and what works and what doesn't. Thank you so much.